He was a man who had learned to measure life in appointments, investments, and the thin slice of newspaper headlines that mentioned his name. He moved through airports the way other men moved through rooms, alert, efficient, slightly removed. That morning the terminal bathed in winter light, and he was wrapping up a long trip, thinking about the contract waiting on his desk and the party scheduled for that evening. His plane had landed early. He had an hour to kill. He preferred the quiet lounges, but the one that day was full, so he wandered into the general concourse, briefcase in hand, face practiced to smoothness. He could have sworn he saw someone out of the corner of his eye, a woman he had once known by the soft rhythm of making beds, by the way her hands folded sheets with the same gentle exactness she used when she dressed small scraped knees years ago. But no, he told himself. That life had been boxed away a decade ago. People came and went. She saw him first. She was standing by a coffee kiosk, a stroller beside her, and for a heartbeat she did not see the man who had once signed the checks that paid for the roof over her head. Then she looked up, and her eyes widened not in fear but in a sharp, quick curiosity, like the moment you realize two photos are almost the same. The man in the tailored coat felt his chest unclench and then tighten. Memory arrived, not as a flood but as a single unspooling ribbon. The echo of a name called down a corridor, the sound of laughter through a nursery curtain, the rustle of a blanket he had never bothered to ask about. There were two of them in the stroller, bundled in identical blue hats, sleeping with brows that looked carved from the same stone. The shape of the jaw, the slope of the nose, the way one ear was just slightly higher than the other, details landed on him like falling coins. He felt the world tilt. She smiled before she had a chance to think. A smile that was practiced into survival had softened. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. Her voice was steadier than his heart. "It's been a long time." "It has," he answered. He tried to place the right amount of distance in his tone, the right currency of apology. "You're Marina," she said. He tasted that name, unexpected and small and ordinary, and it hooked him in a place he thought had been sealed. He had hired her when the house on the hill still smelled of new paint and the nursery had been a promise not yet seasoned by late-night feedings and the size of babies. She had been steady then, and she had been honest about the small, private ways she kept order in a house that otherwise lived by others' rules. She shifted the stroller, eyes flicking toward the tiny faces. "These are my twins, Matteo and Eli." The names hit like a bell. He had never been called Matteo in any language, but the sound keyed something impossible. Matteo stirred, eyelids fluttering, and his hand found the air the way newborns do. The man felt a strange gravity, as if the world had shifted its center and he was falling toward a place called father without ever having signed on. "Twins," he said, then stopped. That was a poor detail to make a revelation on. They look like me." She shrugged from her shoulders, an old habit of covering what words could not. "People say that sometimes. They say that about the baby on the train, the barista's son, anyone. When you're famous, resemblance follows you around like a rumor." He laughed, a brittle sound. "I'm not famous." The denial was reflexive. On paper he was a man recognized in certain circles. But here, in a terminal with a woman who had folded his shirts and watched over the places in his life the public never saw, every title felt thin. She studied him, and the air between them condensed into a question the man had not asked himself for years. Who did he become in the absence of what he had once known? It was an ugly question when spoken, but there it was, filling the small world between the coffee kiosk and gate 23. "Do you want to hold them?" Marina asked suddenly, like the sort of breach she'd made 1,000 times in other households. Practical, urgent, offering redemption through action. He hesitated, measuring the risk of touching lives he had not raised. Yet the gesture was simple, and he found himself answering before the ledger of his life could close the deal. "Yes." She lifted Matteo out first, small weight curling against his chest, already smelling like baby formula and the warmth of sleep. The man held him and remembered the way the house had once been arranged for little hands. Books in a low shelf, soft rugs, a tiny canoe in the attic. Memory was not a nice thing to look at when it held the ghosts of opportunity in the shape of years gone. But he was surprised at the tenderness that rose without instruction. He had investors to call and a foundation to steer and obligations that lived on calendars, but now his arms held something that required no ledger. The second twin, Eli, was more restless. He gripped the man's lapel with a sudden tiny fist, his fingers finding skin. In that small grip he felt accusation, curiosity, and a claim. The man smiled, without thinking deeply, then felt foolish for such an ordinary joy. They talked like strangers who had been neighbors of a sort in a past life. Marina told him about the years after she left. About finding work, the slow double pull of savings and nights spent with the television low and the world loud beyond the window. She spoke of the twins' father in clipped, careful bursts, how he had been present in a way that had not been enough, how he had left on the sticky summer when the twins were small, and how she had learned to be both mother and mapmaker. She kept her voice taut with the discipline of not expecting much. He listened. He had never thought of himself in that role, someone whose absence had real consequences. Absence as action was a hard ledger to balance. He'd thought money paid for the small things, that charity and checks could substitute for the hours. Yet here were the tangible results of choices he had made, not in malice but in the quiet arithmetic of ambition. "How did you?" he began. "You left," Marina interrupted gently. "And I made them." The words were simple, but they cut deeper than either expected. "I don't want anything from you. I didn't come here to ask for help." Relief was honest and immediate. He was not ready to be the kind of man who could simply re-enter. So he smiled with practiced openness. "Then tell me what you need." She looked at him, and in her face was the shape of two lives that had become independent of him. "A favor, maybe? A photograph." She was practical still, pragmatic, the old Marina. "I work at a community clinic. They're doing a health outreach for new mothers, and the poster would get a lot of attention if I could show a photo with someone who looks like the donor we're trying to reach." She said it without pretense, like offering him a small role in something she believed, not a plea. He felt a rush of complication. Publicity was a currency he traded in carefully. Yet when she said, "someone who looks like the donor," the word fell differently. "It could be useful." "Okay," he said. "A photo." They arranged it quickly then, a sudden shard of coordination. Marina exchanging numbers like a bridge, him promising a small donation to an organization he had never met. He would not call it atonement. He would call it assistance, and both of them knew the name dictated the terms of the act. They parted with a neatness that betrayed neither their history nor the small earthquake of seeing their lives fold back in on each other. He went to his car with a hollow feeling and a new resolution he could not yet define. She pushed the stroller away and the twins slept, their faces peaceful and unaware of the ripples they carried. A week later, the photo shoot was arranged at the community clinic, an old brick building with the city's heartbeat humming outside. The photographer was young and earnest and unfamiliar with the careful choreography of appearances that accompanies a man with a name. He arrived on time, shaking off the chill, and Marina greeted him like an ally. The room smelled of coffee and baby powder. Posters on the wall had blocky fonts that promised care and vaccines and dignity. When the camera clicked, the twins looked straight into the lens, unself-conscious. The photograph captured the curve of their cheeks, the way their eyes caught the light, and something else. Some faint resemblance that others in the waiting room noticed when the images were printed and pinned to the corkboard. The campaign was modest but effective. Donations came in small, regular amounts. Volunteers showed up. Local businesses pitched in diapers and blankets. The photographs were shared on social media and picked up by a local morning show. Comments ranged from the sentimental to the suspicious. There was always speculation when two faces matched a man known by certain circles, and someone somewhere suggested, in a tone of excitement, that a reunion might be a good human interest piece. The man, watching the spread on his lap in his office one Sunday, felt a mixture of exposure and a strange pride. He had not asked to be noticed, yet he was. An old instinct to avoid entanglement rose up, but it was quieter now, displaced by the small steady beat of curiosity he had not expected to keep. He reached out to Marina then, not with a contract but with an offer of help that came with no cameras and no announcements. A scholarship, discreet support for the clinic, a summer program for the twins. He asked for nothing in return. The offer was made because the shape of the world had changed when he saw those faces. He could not unsee the claim in those eyes. Marina hesitated, the years of independence pressing around her like a shield. "We don't need charity," she said at first, and he heard pride and instinct and something protective. "We need fairness, not pity." "I know," he said. "Then let me help make some fair things happen." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a bridge rebuilt. It was not thunderous. There were awkward lunches where he learned to boil an egg the way she did, and evenings when the twins toddled toward him with a fierce ownership of his attention. He learned their small rituals. Mateo always nudged his left shoe, Eli preferred the hum of a ceiling fan. He learned to listen in the way a man whose life had been measured in meetings must learn to listen. The patient, clumsy practice of asking questions and waiting for an answer rather than supplying one. Publicly, journalists wanted the reunion story. The man declined interviews with the same efficiency he used to decline investors' pitches. He gave one careful statement about supporting community programs and nothing more. He would not allow his private life to be a headline. Marina appreciated that restraint, even as she guarded her own privacy fiercely. One afternoon, as summer showed its first warm edges, the twins ran to him in a park and he swept them up. They were laughing, their hair catching the light like threads. Marina watched from the bench, sipping cold coffee, and when she smiled it was not for him alone. It was a gentle appraisal of both the man and the life she had woven alone. "That's them," she said almost to herself. He understood what she meant. They were not simply echoes of choices past. They were the living consequence of decisions made in both presence and absence. They were, in their small imperfection, beautiful. They had nothing to prove to anyone. As weeks became months, he found his presence was not a calculation but a commitment that grew organically. He taught them to say a new word, steady, and meant it both for himself and for them. He realized that wealth could purchase comfort but not the currency of time. He had to give that away. Not everything resolved like the neat ending of a photograph. There were awkward conversations with lawyers and an ex-wife who resurfaced with claims and a reporter who tracked a rumor a little too close. Marina's trust had to be earned again and again. It could not be bought. But the twins learned to reach for him when they needed a hand. He learned to answer. One evening, he found Marina watching them sleep in a small nursery they had helped renovate together. She glanced at him and said, "You came back." He sat down beside her, careful with the quiet. "I saw them," he said. "And I saw myself. Not the man I thought I was, but the one I can be." She looked at him, measuring the truth. "Good," she said simply, the single word full of everything they could not say. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary urgencies. Inside, a small house held two boys who looked like the man and a woman who had kept them safe. It was not a story of dramatic forgiveness or sweeping gestures. It was a story of small, steady things. 2 naps that ran on schedule, a meal cooked together, bills paid without fanfare, a bedtime story read in a voice that meant more than money could. Years later, when the twins were taller and less inclined to nap, someone would look back and try to tell the story in a sentence. They would say the billionaire was stunned at an airport when he saw his ex-maid with twins who looked just like him. The sentence was true, tidy enough for any headline. But the life that followed was less tidy. It was full of late apologies stitched into routines, of lunches that taught him how to be seen, of the slow building of trust. He was not perfect. He made mistakes, annoyed impatience at a soccer game, a missed recital he would never forgive himself for, a speech meant for the board that he should have given to the boys instead. Yet he learned to return, to keep showing up in small ways that added up. Marina watched, sometimes skeptical, sometimes relieved, and in the end she allowed herself to believe that his return was not a moment but a direction. On a quiet morning at the airport years after that first chance meeting, the man walked past the coffee kiosk and felt a familiar tug when he heard a child laughing. He turned and saw the boys, no longer bundled in blue hats, chasing a kite, their faces lifted like flags. For a second, the whole world was a bright, moving photograph. He smiled, the kind that arrives from the ribs, and he knew he had found something that money had never bought, a family that chose him back again and again. "I chose one another."